Hello everyone, slightly different video this time, but as I said in my 5-year anniversary video, which you can see on my channel on YouTube, I will occasionally do topical videos, and this is one of them. As I mentioned in that video, I've been doing evangelism for around 15 years now, and in that time I've noticed many changes in the way people engage and also what kind of people we engage with. To give you a couple of illustrations, for example, I would often go out with a group of evangelists to a location in central London, and we would usually do evangelism using a technique called sketchboarding. And this is a technique in which the gospel message is presented using some creative painting. The idea being that it would be something that people might find interesting. They would stop by, they would form a bit of a circle around the evangelist who would do the painting. The evangelist would present the gospel using that painting, using that creative presentation for about maybe 10-15 minutes. And then after he would be done, he would invite people who have gathered into conversation, and we would be part of the crowd, and we would continue the conversation with those who have stopped by. Now, 10 years ago, that seemed to work, and there would be inevitably a small crowd that would form around the sketchboard, which was exactly the point. But since in the last couple of years, certainly since COVID, I found it very extremely difficult to draw any sort of crowds using this same technique. And I was just wondering, is that something that we're doing differently or wrong? And I know we're not. We're using the same sketchboard, same messages that worked for years. And now suddenly we are not able to draw any crowds. Why is that? Is it that people just have less attention spans? We notice people listening to headphones. And is it that just it takes much more to get their attention? So that's just one example. Another example is just in the kind of people that we tend to interact with. So again, 10 years ago, there would be much fewer Muslims that we would engage with. They would be pretty rare. We would maybe speak to, if we did speak to Muslims, it would maybe tend to be someone like a tourist from Saudi Arabia that would be here for shopping. The conversation would be quite respectful. They wouldn't necessarily agree with us. They would stick to their understanding of faith. We would explain our position. It would be ultimately a fairly respectful and conversation. It would end amicably. We would each wish each other well. But again, over the last couple of years, those kind of conversations have changed, and we do speak a lot more to Muslims. However, they're usually local. They're younger. And the conversation is not always respectful. We often find that those interactions can be quite contentious. The Muslims seem to be quite following a script. Maybe they've heard that from their imams, from their sheikhs, from their mosques. Ultimately, the script is meant to counter-evangelize, to challenge, to enter into polemics, and they don't often end very amicably. It's a frustrating debate, a lot of time taken up by it, and I've certainly personally grown to dislike those kind of conversations. But anyway, that's again a kind of change that we've seen over the last couple of years. Then thirdly, this is something that fairly recently came up, certainly in Christian circles, and certain reports have come out, the whole idea of a quiet revival, and that is the idea that the younger people tend to be more interested in Christianity, in spirituality. They're filling churches. They're seeking answers, so to speak. And I have to be honest, in my own experiences, haven't been conclusive enough to see this trend personally. I mean, I did see young people, and there have been a couple of occasions where I was quite surprised of their openness, of their interest, but I just sort of said to myself that, okay, that's interesting. Not something I would quite call a trend, but maybe others, maybe it's just me, maybe others have seen something a little bit more consistent. And so, again, these are the kind of changes that we are seeing on the street, and they've kind of left an impression on me. And so I wondered whether there are indeed these trends. And so last summer I did a small survey. The survey was part of a college course that I was taking, and the intention is to try to find out whether those impressions that I had were shared with other street evangelists. And so what was the survey about? It was basically I've sent out a web-based set of questionnaires, open-ended questions. So it's a qualitative web-based survey, not something that I think could be considered overly scientific, but enough to get some interesting data and trends that would then, the idea being that would then lead to areas of further, deeper study. The people that I've canvassed and solicited help from in this survey, these were the evangelists in the open air campaigner and open air mission organizations. These were the evangelists that I often kind of rub shoulders with on the streets, know them, know how they operate, how they work, and know that they've been around for many years, and that I would have a lot to say on some of these questions, especially if we're looking over the last sort of 10 years. And so I've probed on their experiences, specifically around the demographics and changes in demographics that they've observed, or engagement patterns that they've observed over the last 10 years. I've kept all the responses anonymous. I've collected those answers. I've analyzed them for key themes, and sort of saw what sort of commonalities there might be. So again, not a scientific survey, but meant to give an interesting street level perspective that could be then probed further. If you are interested in obtaining the full report, leave me a comment in this video and I'll get it back to you. It's a PDF, it's about 15 pages. We got some graphs and charts. There are some of them I'll show now on the screen, but if you want to read the full report, I'll be more than happy to share it with you. So just, leave me a comment. So without further ado, let's look at some of these trends, some of these data that came through this service. I'll share my screen here. Here we go. Now I've skipped through the first number of pages, which are sort of just explaining in narrative format, all the kind of synthesis of the methodology, the synthesis of answers, my sort of analysis of those answers, and which I'll just talk you through now. I'll spare you a little bit of the time to read through it, but which you certainly, if you want to have a copy, I'll happy to share with you. But so this first chart speaks about some of the demographic information that was collected through the survey, and again meant to answer the third of the examples that I just walked through, and that is, are we seeing differences in terms of the age population that we interact with on the street? So out of the 16 sort of answers that I received back from the evangelists that I canvassed, again, not a huge number here, but again, the idea is just to see directionally what sort of, are there any trends at all we can probe into here. And this chart, as you can see on the screen, certainly points that there is indeed this idea of a quiet revival, the idea of young adults, Gen Z as they're known, being interested and more engaged in spiritual topics seems to be resonating here. There's much more engagement. So about 12 out of 16 evangelists have reported seeing more engagement in that age group. Now, interestingly, as you can see, there's a reverse trend as well. There certainly seems to be a less engagement in some of the older populations. There seems to be a hardening of hearts of sorts in the older generations, who some of the evangelists have described them as being polite but cynical, certainly hardening to the gospel. Like I said, I'm personally still a little bit on the fence regarding the young people and their interest in Christianity. I'd like to see this validate itself maybe over time. So not just a blip, not just a sort of a fad, so to speak, but I'm certainly encouraged. I'm glad that this trend that we heard in that quiet revival report that we are seeing in our churches seems to be also seen on the streets. So maybe some good news there and something to keep our eyes out for. Now, again, for the other trend that I mentioned that we've noticed about the religious affiliation, so let's take a look at that section of the report. There we go. Another chart similar where every dot is basically represents a response, a qualitative response that was then interpreted on this chart in terms of whether we are seeing any type of religious affiliation being more engaged or less engaged in conversations on the street. An interesting chart. As you can see, there's some very strong signals in the atheist and Muslim categories. On the atheist side, quite interesting kind of split. Some evangelists saying they're seeing more engagement, other evangelists seeing less engagement. Now, that's interesting because about 10 years ago, I think that would have been probably much more skewed towards more engagement. I remember around that time, it was all about the God delusion from Dawkins. It was new atheism. A lot of the questions that we're getting on the street were very much the arguments that they put forth in their books. And so it's quite a popular thing to bring up, to argue for. Not so much. Maybe in some I guess circles that's still represented, or maybe it's a different kind of an argument, but much more of a mix than it used to be before. Whereas if you can see on the Muslim category, a definite signal, a lot more engagement is seen. As I mentioned, it tends to be, and this was confirmed by some of the evangelists, that tends to be younger people, argumentative, polemical kind of discussions, and we can definitely see that that's being confirmed through this report. Now, for the final category, as I mentioned, I've noticed people just not stopping by our sketchboards, and I was wondering whether there's some sort of a trend in terms of broader willingness to engage by the passers-by. And so here's the last sort of charts that I will share with you from the report. And I guess here, the data is interesting for its lack of a signal from the 16 responses that I've received. Some said maybe slightly less. Others, they've said no, it's about same. Others have said no, we're seeing more engagement. So I suppose that maybe the things that we're seeing, that I'm seeing personally with the sketchboarding that we're doing, maybe it's something that's localized. Maybe that particular method is not as effective in the area that we are doing it. Maybe it still works, and maybe other methods work just the same as they did before. So maybe there's some sort of a locality, maybe there's a methodology difference that is worth investigating further. And then in terms of receptiveness of message, what message here refers to is the gospel message. That basically seems to be definite signal there. Again, driven by the sort of the younger people who have certainly carried the underlying data towards the positive end, and being more receptive to the gospel, whereas those that other sort of areas we're not seeing as much resistance maybe as we used to do from the likes of atheists. We're seeing in general less atheism, less combativeness, less skepticism, much more maybe agnosticism, willingness at least to have the conversation. Again, maybe that's part of that sort of overall trend of greater interest in spirituality, which we'll see whether and how long that lasts. Well, anyway, hope you found this little brief foray into some data analytics interesting. I find it quite interesting, even so much so that after this report, I have decided to look into further about how could we as evangelists make more sense of the data. How could we collect it How could we collect it in a meaningful, structured way? We are all going on the streets almost every day. Certainly, I do every week. We come into contact with people. We share oftentimes those reports with one another for encouragement, for prayer. And it's valuable data that if we had in this sort of structured format by demographics, by sort of follow through and what happened, if we could capture that data, I think it'll be incredibly powerful, so that we can reflect on that and see what trends there exist in society, how our methodologies might need to adjust, how to make sure that the gospel continues to be proclaimed and is effective on the ears of those that we come into contact with. So I'll create another video in terms of what I've done in response to that, but it's I hope it's something that's useful. It's a use of technology. It's a use of an app that I think evangelists would find useful on the streets. But I'll put another video to explain to you guys a little bit more on what that looks like. But anyway, for now, let me know if you found this helpful, interesting. And again, if you want to read the full report, there's some other charts and data points here. We've also asked evangelists what they've done in response to some of these trends, how they've changed their ways. And if that interests you, just let me know. I'm happy to share it. But for now, thank you very much for your attention, and see you in the next video. God bless you.